Good morning, my friends. I'm Pastor Ben Hayes from First Baptist Church, Dadeville, Alabama, bringing you our thoughts for the day on this magnificent Monday. It is Columbus Day, and my lovely wife is off, so I am taking the day off to be with her. We will have our Firefighters Bible study tonight at 6 p.m., so come and join us for that. But right now, I want you to join me in Hebrews chapter 12, picking up in verse 18. We talked about this a little bit on Friday, but I think it's worth going back to and focusing on again because Paul is trying to help us to understand what it means to be a Christian, the blessing that it is to know that God loves us so much that he gave us the gift of salvation through his son, Jesus Christ. And as we come to verse 18, he's sending them back in their minds to Old Testament. And you'll remember this story when I share it with you. But he says, "For you have not come to the mountain that may be touched and that burned with fire, and to blackness and darkness and tempest, and the sound of a trumpet and the voice of words, so that those who heard it begged that the word should not be spoken to them any more. For they could not endure what was commanded, and what was commanded is this, and if so much as a beast touches the mountain, it shall be stoned or shot with an arrow." That was when God came down to Mount Sinai and wanted to speak with the people of Israel. That was his purpose. He wanted to meet with them and to speak with them, but they were so terrified when they got there because God descended on the mountain with fire and lightnings and thunderings, and his voice was scary, and the rules were pretty strict. If an animal walked onto the mountain, it was to be shot with an arrow. If a person did, the same thing was to happen because the mountain had been made holy by God's presence. Only Moses and the elders of Israel were allowed to come up the mountain, and only after they had sanctified themselves, made themselves holy through the offering of sacrifices and special washings that took place. But God's purpose was he wanted to speak so that the people would hear. And you remember what they did? They said, "Moses, this is too scary for us. Why don't you go talk to God, and then you can tell us what God says?" And that's how it ended up being from that point on, because they did not want to have a direct conversation with the Father. They were scared to death of what was happening even on the mountain. And so pick up in verse 21. "And so terrifying was the sight that Moses said, 'I am exceedingly afraid and trembling.'" Look, we don't have to come to God like that. We don't have to be afraid. When God comes to us, it is not with lightnings and thunderings and a loud voice. It's not with threats that if you touch this or you do that, you're going to die. It's with the grace of God that has opened the throne room of heaven to you and to me. In fact, we are invited, we are commanded to boldly come into the throne room of grace and to speak with God, to speak to God, to hear from him. We've been invited to become a part of his family, not just as servants, not just as slaves, but as sons and daughters of God. And even Moses, who was the leader of Israel, who had spoken to God on multiple occasions, was exceedingly afraid and trembling. So compared to what the nation of Israel went through, listen to this, verse 22. "But you have come to Mount Zion and to the city of the living God, the heavenly Jerusalem, to an innumerable company of angels, to the general assembly and church of the firstborn who are registered in heaven, to God, the judge of all, to the spirits of just men made perfect, to Jesus, the mediator of the new covenant, and to the blood of sprinkling that speaks better things than that of Abel." Wow, what a difference. We don't come to a mountain that's on fire and smoking and lightnings and thunderings going around. We come into the presence of God, into the city of the living God, the heavenly Jerusalem, see angels and all this there, but as part of the church of the firstborn who are registered in heaven to God. We're his sons. We're his daughters. We don't have to be afraid when we come into his presence. We can experience him in all of his fullness at any time that we choose, simply by humbling ourselves before him and crying out to him, praying and listening for his voice. What a blessing it is to know that we have this opportunity. We have this invitation, and it is open-ended. What a great God we serve. Be blessed. I'll see you back here tomorrow.